Chat box. Okay, good morning. Om Agyantamirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuru Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadhati Swapadhantikam. Hari Om Tat Sat. Let us continue our study of Ragvartma Chandrika. So we've heard so far about the cause of the adhikar, basically, for the path of Raganuga Bhakti, Lobha. We heard about the characteristics of Lobha. And we heard about the cause of Lobha, which is twofold: the mercy of Bhagavan or the mercy of the devotee. The mercy of Bhagavan is more rare. The mercy of devotee. Now, the devotee here means anuragi bhakta. So not just like that word was used by Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, anuragi. So that means a raganuga sadhaka or siddha. So in other words, a devotee who is absorbed in that state of awareness, they can give what they have, can't give what you don't have. So by their kripa, you come to get the lobha. And then that lobha, of course, it was mentioned that you can get that kripa, of the anuragi bhakta can come from a previous life or it can come from the present life. If it comes from the previous life, it's called praktana, and if it comes from the present life, it's called adunika. If you got lobha in the previous life and you're not attaining sadhya bhakti, then in this life, when the lobha, when you become reunited with that awareness, you immediately choose a praksik guru who can help you develop that lobha into the goal of life. And so you take shelter of an appropriate guru and make advancement. In the case where it comes from this life, you take shelter of a guru and then the lobha comes at a later point. So we heard that. And now he wants to describe, I think that's the review there. Yeah. And then he quotes Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu as a pramana for the fact that this lobha comes only by mercy of not exclusively by the mercy of a Krishna or a Krishna Bhakta, Anuragi Bhakta. In other words, in the case of Vaidhi Bhakti, it's possible, it seems, that someone can be participating in Varnashram culture and later on come to Vaidhi Bhakti. But that is not the case with Raganuga Bhakti. That adhikar only comes by this kripa. So Vaidhi Bhakti will not turn into lobha like once you attain the stages of nishta and ruchi, which some devotees think, but rather only if this kripa comes, it is possible. So that's where we left off. Now in text number 7, he wants to continue. Well, what happens after you get the lobha? How do you turn that lobha into currency? And it's not enough to be a greedy fellow. You may be greedy, but how do you turn that greed into actual currency or actual objects of enjoyment? So that he's going to now describe how does lobha become a path, basically. So he writes here, when both of the previously mentioned types of devotees, those who have either previously acquired or recently acquired greed, become fervently curious about the means for achieving the ecstatic sentiments of Sri Krishna's eternal associates, they then depend on the direction of the scriptures and the conducive systems prescribed therein. It is only through the assertions of the scriptures that such sentiments can be achieved. There is no other way. For example, how can a person hankering to drink milk acquire it? At that point, he needs the guidance of a knowledgeable person to learn how and where he can easily obtain milk. Since he is hankering for milk, he will accept instructions on how to purchase a cow and maintain it. Only after the cow has given birth to a calf will he be able to milk the cow and drink the milk. In this way, the person thirsty for milk has to accept different directives from a trusted source on buying a cow, milking and feeding her, and so on. In the same manner, a sadhaka filled with greed must also profit from relevant instructions. One cannot gain knowledge on his own. He must accept proper direction. In Srimad Bhagavatam 8.6.12, Lord Brahma explains, quote, just as a human being traditionally derives fire from wood, milk from a cow, grains and water from the earth, and money from enterprise, and thereby maintain his life. In the same way, O Vishnu, those expert in bhakti say that we can attain you by utilizing our intelligence to take proper association. By this, we will overcome the three modes of nature and thus progress gradually in bhakti. Very nice. The idea of this statement is to explain the relationship of a to explain the relationship of one who's attained lobha with scripture. Because previously we heard that the characteristic of lobha is that one is not dependent on shastra and yukti. They are not dependent on scripture and logic. But here, Sri Vishwanath wants to clarify that does not mean that there is no relationship to Shastra Vidhi. So he wants to clarify what is the relationship to Shastra Vidhi of a devotee who has lobha. So as we just mentioned, greed, in order to transform greed into currency, you have to accept some path. And when you accept some path, that means there are so many instructions to be followed. So that is basically what he's explaining here, that you may have lobha, and for lobha, that characteristic is there is no dependence on shastra and yukti. But if you want to turn that lobha into the actual attainment of satya bhakti, you have to follow some path, namely the Rag Marg path. And that Rag Marg path is having so many instructions. So much vidhis are coming on that Rag Marg path also. And from where those vidhis are derived, they are also derived from Shastra only. They cannot be derived from another place. So it's not that you can just make up your own path as you go along. You have to follow the vidhis that are given in Shastra. And that is, that's the point here. So having lobha is not enough. You still have to follow a path, and that path will have so many vidhis on it. And those vidhis must be derived from Shastra, because it can't be derived from another place, because only Shastra is describing these things. So then he gives a simple example of a person who is greedy to drink milk. Of course, this is before there were grocery stores. So he's giving a practical example, pre-industrial. Now, if you were thirsty for milk, you just go to the grocery store and buy it. But in the pre-industrial world, if you're thirsty for milk, then you have to get a cow. And so then that's going to lead to you asking questions. Well, how do I acquire a cow? How do I milk it, et cetera, et cetera? So many questions will come up when you have to turn that thirst into practical milk. And that means you're going to have to go to a person who can instruct you how to do the things necessary to acquire the milk and then drink it. So in the same way, the person who has thirst, ruchi, or lobha for attaining brajabhav, they require instruction for turning that thirst into the actual taste, for turning thirst into rasa, right? And for turning lobha into the taste of the experience of brajbhav, then you require so much instruction. That's the point he wants to make here. And instruction means what? Following some vidhis. Doesn't mean, so the path is, in one sense, you can say the path is not spontaneous, because we call it spontaneous devotion, which is can be a misleading way to describe it. Real spontaneous devotion is sadhya bhakti, actually. But before sadhya bhakti, the bhakti is not really spontaneous. It may be based on a deep taste for experiencing a certain reality. But in order to get to that reality, so many steps need to be taken, which means based on so many vidhis. So that's the point he wants to make here. And so he quotes this verse from Srimad Bhagavatam as pramana for this idea also. This is A612. This is in the chapter where the demons and the devatas are making a truce to churn, the milk ocean so they can get the nectar. This is coming in that section. And this particular verse is describing how one can perceive God in this world. Or in the context of its use in the Ragvartma Chandrika, how can one taste Braj Bhav? That's the context in which it's being used here. So the verse says here, and it's a very nice verse, Yataknim e das amritancha boshu, Bovyanam ambudya manecha vritim, yogar manushya adiyanti hitvam, guneshu budya kavayovananti. This is probably a good verse to learn. I'll read the translation first. As one can derive fire from wood, milk from the milk bag of the cow, food grains and water from the land, and prosperity and one's livelihood from industrial enterprises, so by the practice of bhakti yoga, even within this material world, one can achieve your favor or intelligently approach you. Those who are pious all affirm this. So how can one see God? That's the context of this verse. Or in the context of Ragvartma Chandrika, how can one taste Braj Bhav? Well, it is by the process of bhakti. Yoghara manusha adiyanti hitvam. One can obtain you in this world, guneshu, in the world of three gunas, by yoga. Yoga here means bhakti yoga. So by bhakti, you can experience God. Now, some examples are being given, and here the examples are very important to Sri Vishwanath's point in Ragvartma Chandrika. The first example is yatagnim e dhasi. So, and fire is kindled from rubbing the wood together. Yes? So just as you rub the wood together and the fire comes out, so by bhakti yoga, Krishna will come out. That's the idea. If you take one wood is, you can say the mind as the main instrument for bhakti in one sense. And the other wood is bhakti yoga. So you rub them together and then you can experience God. You understand? There will not be any experience if you don't rub the mind against bhakti yoga. Chanting Hare Krishna, but thinking of something else, that is not rubbing the wood together. So you have to, the mind has to be given over to the bhakti yoga, and that's like the rubbing of the wood. Then the fire will come out. So the fire is Krishna, or in the case of Ragvartma Chandrika, the fire is Braj Bhav. Now he says, Sri Vishwanath comments, that this example is given to say, just as you have to go to a teacher to learn how to kindle wood to produce a fire. So in the same way, you have to go to a teacher to learn bhakti, by which you can experience the fire of God. Or you have to go to a teacher to learn bhakti, by which you can attain Braj Bhav in the context of Ragvartma Chandrika. You understand? Can any of you kindle fire from the wood? Any of you know how? Question, you know how? I certainly don't know how. So that means if you want to do that, you have to go to some teacher to learn, isn't it? Otherwise, you may have seen on the TV show or the cartoon, but if you try, nothing will happen. You will only look foolish. So similarly, if you try to do bhakti without guidance, you will look foolish only. From those who know how to do it, they will laugh at you. Others who are fools like you, they'll think you're doing something. But those who actually know how to kindle the wood, they see, like look at this guy, look. And they all start giggling. So in the same way, if you try to do bhakti, particularly Rag Marg, without guidance, then you will be laughed at by those who know the science. That's what he's saying. Another example is given here, amritam chagoshu. So just as the milk is coming from the cow, so Sri Vishwanath comments that this example is saying that just to get the milk to flow easily, you have to bring a calf, right? When you bring the calf, then the milk begins to flow easily, and then you can obtain the milk. So in the same way, by proper association of devotees, then the milk comes flowing very nicely. Thus he said, this is the purpose of this particular example. So the first is giving the importance of needing a guru to teach you. After you learn, you need the association of devotees to keep the thing flowing nicely. That's the purpose of this analogy, he says here. Then he says here, Bhuvi Anam. So just as the grain is coming from the earth, so even one seed you plant in the earth, it can produce an abundance of fruits. From even one seed can come an abundance of fruits. So in the same way, I think for this example, he says, yeah, similarly, by a profusion of bhakti, right? There could be by a profusion of bhakti, one comes to have these high level experiences. Yeah. So just as you plant a seed, and from the seed, there can be a profusion of fruits that come out. So the seed of bhakti, when cultivated at a good amount, it produces the experience of Brajabhav. There should be a profusion of bhakti. He said this is the purpose of this example. Just like the verse, Bhakti Pareshana Bhava Virakti Anyatra Chaisha Chika Ekakala. Prapadyama Nashri Yatashna Tashus Tushti Pushti Shurapayo Nagasam. So the verse is saying, we know it. Three things happen on the progressive path of bhakti. Number one, bhakti. Number two, paresha anubhava. Number three, virakti, detachment. In the same way that a person engaged in eating gets nourishment, satisfaction, and freedom from hunger. So if you eat a little bit, then you get a little bit of satisfaction, freedom from hunger, nourishment. If you eat a lot, then you get a lot of nourishment, satisfaction from hunger. So the same is true of bhakti. So you have to plant the seed, then by a profusion of bhakti, then you'll come to taste the fruit. So by a profusion of the application of bhakti, you can come to the stage of experiencing Brajabhav. This verse in the context of Rabbi Chandrika. Another verse, Bhuvi of Ambu. So the word Ambu means water. So the water is there in the ground, isn't it? But you have to remove the obstacle. The obstacle is whatever. The obstacle is not the earth per se, but the water is not coming out automatically. So you have to remove the obstacle to the water coming out. So he says, this example is to say, similarly, by previous life association and present life association with devotees, the obstacles to bhakti are removed. He said, this is the purpose of this analogy here. And udyamane chavritim. Vritti here means some occupation, some livelihood you have. And then just as by that livelihood, you maintain yourself. So similarly by the bhakti yoga and sadhana, you'll attain satya bhakti, and that way your life is maintained. Your life is nourished. So and all these examples are given to indicate the association of devotees from learning bhakti and for progressing in bhakti. You understand? Sadhu Sangha is the beginning, middle, and end of devotional life. In the beginning, we say Mahat Sevaya. In the beginning, there's Satam Kripa, right? In the middle, there's Satam Prasangamama Virya Samvido. And in the end, if you attain Satya Bhakti, there's also Sadhu Sangha in order to relish the various tastes of Krishna consciousness. So he's saying this verse is indicating this thing, that in the beginning, middle, and the end, Sadhu Sangha is required. In the beginning, it is inquired for instruction. And in the middle, it is required for progress. And in the end, it is required for relishment. Krishna Bhakti Janma Mula Hai Sadhu Sangha, Krishna Prema Janme Tina Pramaganga. In the beginning, middle, and end, Sadhu Sangha is required. So in this way, he quotes this verse to say that we require instruction. And instruction means so many vidhis will be coming. Do this, don't do that, etc., etc. So the point simply is that in order to turn greed into currency, you have to follow some path, and some path means you have to follow some vidhis, and the vidhis are based on Shastra. So that is the relationship of the devotee who's attained Lobha. That is his relationship with Shastra. So it's not that he has no relationship with it. This is his relationship. So this point is nice because, well, in the experience of the culture in ISKCON, when devotees, I guess it was seen when devotees got into this process without the light of the moonlight shining giving illumination on the path of Ragmar, people think that they can just basically do whatever they want. It's all about spontaneous, whatever the heart is feeling. Because we don't follow any vidis, that's for the Vaidika devotees. But we got Rag now, we got Loba now. So it's about just what's in the heart. No. What's in your heart is the same that's in everyone's heart. Black goop. And you need guidance to get rid of that goop and make progress. So you still have to have some relationship with Shastra in this way. So he's described that here. So that's a very important point. Next statement he makes here, next paragraph. Upon the rise of pure greed, the sadhaka following Rag Marg must engage in the hearing and chanting of transcendental topics from the initial stage of his sadhana. That is taking shelter at the lotus feet of a bona fide spiritual master, Guru Padashraya Lakshana, until he achieves his cherished desire of direct darshan of his worshipful deity. So by following this process, the innermost recesses of his heart gradually become purified, and he achieves the desired goal according to his degree of purification. So the Lord said to Sri Uddhava, 11:14-26, this is such a nice verse. When a medicinal ointment is applied to a diseased eye, the eye's weakness is overcome and its power to discern very subtle objects is restored. In the same way, to the extent that one's heart is purified by repeatedly hearing about and glorifying my supremely sacred pastimes, one can receive a glimpse of my form, which is beyond the scope of matter. So how does the Raganuga Bhakta make advancement? So in the previous statement, we heard he takes instruction from Shastra and from proper guru to make advancement. And then what does his practice and advancement practically consist of? Well, it consists of hearing the stories of Krishna with his associates. So this verse is quoted from Bhagavatam, a very nice verse. Yata yatatma pramigyate aso. So yata yata means, to the degree that the soul is purified. Well, purified by what? Because there are different ways in which you can attain purification. Atma Shuddhi. How you will attain Shuddhi? There are different ways it can be attained. So it says to the degree one is purified by ma punya ghatta shavana abhidanai. So that means hearing and chanting of my pious stories. That is the meaning there. So this Marg Bhakta is making progress by hearing and chanting the stories of Krishna. You can say in some way specifically. His heart or his soul, his very soul, if you will, is getting purified by that process. And tata, so to the degree he is purified by this process, to that degree, Pashati Vastu Shukshman, he is able to see Pashati, the Vastu. So the word Vastu means substance. It refers to Krishna, of course. Here, Vedyam Vasavam Atra Vastu Shivadam Tapatriyam Mulanam. The Vastu is Krishna, who is Shukshman. Shukshman means subtle. And Sri Vishwanath's commentary, he says it refers specifically to the sweetness of Krishna. You can see, the word see, Pashati means to experience. You see with your whole being, which means to experience. The Vastu Shukshman, the sweetness of Krishna. To the degree you purify yourself through this process of hearing and chanting the stories of Krishna. An example is given. It's just like the eyes. If you put the ointment on the eye, some ointment, then it regains a capacity to see better, to see even subtle things. I think the idea here is that the hearing and chanting of Christian stories is critical to the progress of a Raganugiya sadhaka. It is not that by not hearing the stories you're going to make progress in this path. This is the kind of the emphasis here. Just like just like nowadays, we may hear so many stories from the Bhagavatam, but we hear very less of stories of Krishna or his eternal associates. So if we're not hearing that much about Krishna or his eternal associates, then you can't make any progress on this particular path. So you have to make progress from the initial stage, which is taking shelter of the Guru, to the stage of actually experiencing Krishna's sweetness by the process of engaging in the stories, getting purified by engagement with the stories of Krishna specifically, and which speak of him with his eternal associates. And this way, one makes progress from the beginning stages to the advanced stages. And this nice verse from Srimad Bhagavatam is glorified, quoted as Pramanam for that. So devotees, as a sidebar, and I've shared this before, coming from Ayendra, he said that the only anartha that he saw in the Krishna consciousness movement is ISKCON. He said, aside from the good old bodily concept of life, which is an ever-present reality for us, is that we were afraid to become attracted to Krishna. So we keep telling ourselves that the stories of Krishna are too advanced, too esoteric, et cetera, et cetera. And as a result of that, we even conscientiously disengage ourselves from the stories, afraid of becoming sahajiyas or whatever it might be in the culture that we've inherited from ISKCON specifically. So for Raganugiya Sadhaka, that will be detrimental to his progress on the path of Ragmarg. You can't turn Lobha into currency by not hearing the stories of Krishna with his associates. So that becomes critical for his particular mode of progress. For the Vaidhi Bhakta, that may not, for his progress, any story will do also. Just hear Srimad Bhagavatam like this. And so, but if you really want to establish a relationship with the deity of your heart, then you have to hear about their stories. You have to sing songs about them specifically, etc. And that way you make progress. Okay, next verse. This verse is very interesting, and I think this next statement speaks to what I'm going to be calling the Saraswata conservatism. It gives it a little bit of a justification, at least more of it, as we have been discussing earlier. So this paragraph goes on, it says here, when the sadhaka attains greed, the Supreme Lord inspires him by manifesting himself in two forms. Externally in the form of the spiritual master, he gives instructions, and internally as a super soul, he inspires a person from within the heart about the means to achieve his desired object. According to a statement made by Sri Uddhava in Srimad Bhagavatam, in order to follow the method illuminated in the scriptures for obtaining one's cherished devotional mood, bhava, some sadhakas with inborn greed gain complete knowledge by hearing instructions directly from the spiritual master. Others acquire this knowledge by hearing from the lotus mouths of elevated devotees who are well learned in the deep moods of Raganuga Bhakti and who are highly enlightened in such bhavas. For a few others, this knowledge self-manifests in their immaculate hearts through the nectar of bhakti. Profuse, enthusiastic endeavors to attain those moods are witnessed in all of these sadhakas, just as a person who desires material happiness strives with great intensity for his own sense enjoyment. So we've heard the importance of the relationship with Shastra if you want to turn Lobha into currency. And we heard about the means of progress, specifically hearing the stories of one's Ishtadev. In this particular statement, he wants to point out that the necessary information, because again, one requires certain amount of information, if you will, enlightened information. The word information is such like a dry word. One requires a certain amount of enlightened information to turn that, to help shape one's inner world. So you hear from Shastra, so hear from whom? You have to hear from the Guru and what he's speaking. So he says that information will be spoken, you will get the proper information in three ways. The proper information required for the culturing of your inner world is gathered in three ways. Number one, from the lotus mouth of Guru. He says, some will get it from Guru Maharaj. Number two, some will get it from a very learned and advanced Anuragi Bhakta. So Rasik Vaishnav, he's knowing so many things about the inner world of the Brijvasis. And the inner world that you're trying to cultivate, you hear from him, and he gives so much information. And then some will get this information from within by their immaculate heart that has been purified by bhakti. Keshu chet bhakti mrishta chitta vritishu, this line here. Swata evas puruteshu. It will become self-manifest in the heart whose chitta vrittis have been completely purified by bhakti. So these are the three ways in which one acquires the necessary information to move toward the embodiment of a Brajabhav. This verse from Srimad Bhagavatam is quoted. It is Uddhava thanking Krishna in the beginning of the 29th chapter. He's heard most of the Uddhava Gita at that point. So he expresses gratitude and is saying that even if he had a lifetime of Lord Brahma, he would not be able to express a sufficient amount of gratitude. And why are you feeling grateful? Well, because you appear inside and outside. Inside, you appear as the Chaitya Guru, and outside, you appear as Guru Dev or advanced Vaishnava to give enlightenment about how we can approach you. So, how can I express a sufficient amount of gratitude for such kindness you're just giving to me? So, the idea here is simply put that you can hear from Guru or Vaishnava about the inner world. Now, basically, whatever is in your sadhana, that is what you'll attain in your sadhya. You understand? So this point we've heard so many times, it's coming all over the place. But whatever is the quality of your sadhana, that's what you can expect to obtain in your sadhya. This verse I've quoted many times, Tvam Bhakti Yoga Pari Bhavita Ritsaroja Ase Shrutekshita Patananatapumsa, a very famous verse. Tata vapu pranase yayadiya ta urugaya vibhavayanti. Tata vapu pranayase saranugrahaya. So the second line of the verse specifically says, yayadiya ta urugaya vibhavayanti. So according to your meditation, tata vapu pranayase saranugrahaya. According to your meditation, there will be realization of Krishna. But when I got a chance to, I was doing some sadhu sangha in Govardhan, and we were with an old friend of mine, and we were discussing several verses from Srimad Bhagavatam, and this verse came up. So he shared one statement of Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in this verse, saying that the yadiya part, according to your meditation, doesn't only mean the meditation of the form of God in your heart, but it also means the meditation of your specific relationship with that form. So that you will also come to obtain by the grace of God at the time of realization. So according to meditation, you'll get realization. So according to the meditation on God, and according to your meditation on yourself and relationship to that form, both. Yadhiya. So as I have been mentioning earlier on, the historical development of this path was that a guru would give you what came to be known as Ekadasha Bhav. So Ekadasha Bhav means 11 aspects that pertains to a Brajabhav, including a name, including your dress, your place of birth in Vrindavan, your service. There are 11 aspects right there. It was called Ekadasha Bhav. So this was at the time of initiation, a guru would give you this as the form in which you were to contemplate within yourself during the stage of sadhana. And so whatever was the contemplation during the stage of sadhana, then it was that you could expect to obtain at the stage of sadhya. According to meditation, there will be realization. So that's how, probably even based somewhat on what Sri Vishwanath is writing here, this is how some of the paths came to develop themselves. Some means what became known historically as the tradition was this, that the guru or some Rasik Vaishnava at the time of initiation would give, these different aspects of the Ekadasha Bhav, and you were to cultivate your inner life or meditate in that particular way. So you could see yourself as a Braja associate in very specific ways. And that's how you basically cultivate the inner life. And from this statement, it seems it has its bona fideness here. Sri Saraswati Thakur later on took issue with this, as we mentioned, because historically speaking, if your line is in the Siddha, how he will give you this sort of meditation. You may be given to someone who's not yet qualified by true Loba or a mature Loba for that sort of meditation or practice. Or else you yourself are, not as kind of bogus, basically, and but you got born in a certain lineage, you have a certain popularity, people are coming to you, so you're just sharing like that to save face, but you're, not fully authorized. You can see there's a little booklet called Prakrita Rasa Shata Dushini. I think that's the name of the book. Prakriti Rasa Shata Dushini, 100 statements about material rasa. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta he's so heavy. I mean, he's characteristically heavy, but he's really heavy in that particular small little booklet. And this was his main critique. So he kind of took the approach that there should be a revelation from within, because revelation can also come from within of the necessary information required to culture that inner world that will match what you can attain at the time of Satya Bhakti. As a little bit of an anecdote to this, I just recently heard this when I was in Vrindavan. Devotees were, I guess some certain translations of certain esoteric books were coming out in Vrindavan. And a lot of devotees were leaving, questioning Prabhupada, leaving ISKCON and going to, whatever, the Babajis or different places to acquire the true, the information for the real practice of bhakti and all that. So Ayendra Prabhu, it seems, this is what was told to me in this last trip, he got frustrated and he kind of prayed to his Nitai Sachi Sutta, his Radhe Shyam, and said, do I have to leave ISKCON in order to get the real thing, or will you give me everything? And so he put the Lord to a test, and he said, if I have to, I forget how he is worded actually, but something to the effect that I'll fast until death until you give me the necessary information required for, this sort of obtaining of Krishna consciousness in me, perfected state. Because I'll not go to any other guru, I'll not leave ISKCON. So he started fasting, it seems. And he fasted for weeks. This devotee was telling me, he said Ayendra got completely emaciated. He was there when this was going on. He said Ayendra got completely emaciated. He said we were kind of like scared what's going to happen to him. And then after 2 weeks of this like intense rut that he took, apparently he was gifted from within 7 aspects of the 11 from Srila Prabhupada. Because he had prayed to Srila Prabhupada, you should be able to give everything. So Prabhupada, it seems, gave him 7 of the 11 aspects of this Ekadasha Bhav format and said the rest will come later. And after that, there was a marked change in his devotional service. So you can take it or leave it as you like. That was what was told to me as a little bit of an anecdote here. But the idea here is that this is certainly one way in which information can come from within. And it appears that Saraswati Thakur favored this. Let the information come from inside by your intense application of Bhakti Yoga. Not that you are hardly applying Bhakti Yoga and you just go to some guru, they tell you something, you just like apply something like that. No. Your Bhakti should be intense, and from within the information can come. Because Krishna can give from within also. So he says this thing. Krishna says this thing in Gita, right? What is that verse? Tesham satata yuktana bhajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhi yogam tanyanama upayantite. So he says, for those persons who are satatam yuktana bhajatam priti purvakam, they are constantly engaged in my bhakti, bhajatam priti purvakam, with the priti. So what does priti purvakam mean here? Priti purvakam means with a desire for, this sort of devotional attainment that we're reading about here in Rabbi Chandrika. So if you're constantly engaged in bhakti, then Krishna says himself, Dadami Buddha Yogam Sa, I will give the divine intelligence by which you can approach me or obtain me, come closer. And so it seems that devotees in Saraswat mind, if this could be a defense for this approach, has emphasized this. Let your bhakti be legit. Satata Yukta Nam. Satata Yukta Nam means like legit. Like you're not getting distracted by matter at all. You're just like going hard for likely years and years and years, just really absorbing yourself in bhakti yoga. Then you can get the divine revelation from within, at least a sufficient amount of revelation by which you can obtain your desired Brajabhav. So these are the three ways in which this becomes possible. So you have to get instruction from Shastra about these things. So the instruction will come from a guru, the instruction will come from Rasik Vaishnava. And instruction can also come from within, how to culture this inner life for those whose hearts have been really purified by Bhakti Yoga. So, and it appears, and I'm just suggesting this, I think it's a good suggestion based on my awareness, but this is what Saraswat's line is advocating for, this type of approach. Not that sometimes you're doing bhakti and a lot more times you're doing matter, and then you go to a guru and it's like, can I get my Ekadasha Bhav? That seems to be taking things a little bit too cheaply. He goes on to say here, and this last line is kind of important. So after you get the divine, this useful information, if you will, just as a person who, after sense gratification, doesn't play, he works really hard for getting his sense gratification. In the same way, with that level of enthusiasm, one puts in the work for realizing, for gaining the currency, for tasting the Brajabhav. This is the last sentence. Profuse enthusiastic endeavors to attain these moods are witnessed in all these sadhakas. Just as a person who desires material happiness strives with great intensity for his own enjoyment. So, yeah, there's going to be a corresponding level of intensity of application if you got that useful information. Okay, I was hoping to do the next little paragraph also. It's already 9 o'clock though. And maybe I'll take a little pause here. This point is kind of straightforward, but it's a lot of little verses there. Yeah, I'll pause here. So let's see if anyone wants to add anything here. Can you please tell which Anu of Bhakti Sandarbha 331 hints at Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, which commentary did you read on that Anu? Thank you. Can you please tell which Anucheta of Bhakti Sandarbha, which commentary did you read? No, this is coming from just my reading of Bhakti Siddhanta by Bhav. Also, this essay mentioned earlier, this Srila Bhakti Siddhanta and Raganuga Bhakti. So you can read that essay. So that gives a little bit, in a very succinct way, the history of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta's kind of approach to Raganuga Bhakti and the criticisms that come towards Saraswati Thakur and his followers because of his particular approach. So I read Srila Bhakti Siddhanta by Bhav, and that particular essay is in my mind when I speak a little bit about the history there. So Agape says, Hare Krishna Prabhu, so does the realization and development of one's inner world meditation not necessarily come at the initial stage of Lobha? No, it doesn't come at the initial stage of Lobha. One can receive Lobha without that knowledge. Yes, that's the point. Lobha is basically an intense attraction to something. There's a ruchi for it. You're hearing about Sakiba, for example, and you're like, wow, it would be really nice to love God like that. Okay, now that you're attracted to that, how would you transform that attraction into your inner life? So that for that, you require instruction. So that's what we've been hearing about today. So that instructional course is based on Shastra, and you're instructed by Guru or Rasik Vaishnava. And in certain cases, the instruction will come from within. So that's what we're hearing about here. I hope that makes sense. So one can receive Loba without that now, of course, because Loba is coming by Kripa. So you hear some Vaishnava speaking about it. He was like, wow, that's so nice. Then it comes. We're lucky. The word Kaviraj Goswami uses is Mahabhagyavan. Says if you get the degree, then you are extremely fortunate. So it's not like this extremely common thing, but rare. Sri Govinda has something.
I think in the end, probably you just answered what I was going to ask, but it was simply, I was reflecting back on a note that I made at the end of text 5, where you had said something to the effect that no one develops Loba on the basis of Shastra alone. And here I'm understanding that Loba itself alone is insufficient without Shastra and Guru and the furthering of Loba into a process that is actually bringing upon greater and greater realization. I guess what I was wondering was, what is, if any, hope for Vaidya Bhakti, Bhakta, if they cannot develop that Loba? But I think the answer is perhaps in what you just said, that it's through mercy or Kripa that perhaps that.
So the mercy is practical. The mercy is you got to put yourself in the way of the vibrations of a devotee glorifying Krishna in that way. It's a very practical mercy in that sense. It's not like you just sit and wait, but you like, let me go and hear about Krishna, so where devotees are speaking, Krishna Lila, Krishna Katha, and maybe you discover one who's speaking very sweetly in that way, and you kind of latch onto that. And that way we might give ourselves an opportunity to get the mercy by putting ourselves in the way of the vibration where Krishna is being glorified in that particular way. But what has happened in our culture and ISKCON is that it's related to a few metaphysical things. One of them being that devotees we have the conviction that we fell from the spiritual world. So we were already something with Krishna. And therefore there is no need to cultivate a certain inner life to get it. Because if I'm already that thing, then what is the point in putting effort to become something? This is the subsequent logic of that thinking. And then as a result of that thinking, let me just do the hearing and chanting that I'm supposed to do. And when I'm purified of the anarthas, then that will just come to the surface without any needing to cultivate anything. So in that way, this is the implication of that concept. I remember when I, was first getting myself in trouble in Chicago because of saying that the jiva didn't fall from the spiritual world, and I had become convinced. And so one of the leaders who was getting on my case, they asked me, well, what difference does it make? And immediately I said, well, even I was very new to the subject, but I immediately had the intuitive insight that, well, if we were already in the spiritual world, we already have something, then there's no need to cultivate any sort of mentality outside of just like a generic service mentality. But if we weren't with Krishna in the spiritual world, then that means there's going to be a lot more responsibility required to be embraced to grow into that mentality by which we could step into that archetype, if you will, of a Brij Basi. So in this sense, I'm saying this as a generic sense. I think there's a fear of being a person. And I'm taking this from Srila Prabhupada's commentary. It's one of my favorite commentaries in Bhagavad Gita as it is. This is chapter 4, verse 10. I must have referenced it many. Vidaraga Bhaya Krodha Mamayam. So after giving up attachment, fear, and anger and surrendering to Krishna, many persons develop bhava for me through the austerity of knowledge. Bhavo Gyana Tapasa Putama Bhavamagata. I'm going to try to explain this verse in connection to the topic at hand. So he says, many persons, Bhavo, have developed madbhava, means my Bhav, and in this case, Braja Bhav. How? Well, they were purified. Purified by what? Jnana tapasa, the austerity of knowledge. Well, what knowledge? The knowledge of the moods of Braj, right? And it's austere insofar as you have to learn about that. And it's greatly detailed. If you study the book Sri Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which we're going to hear about on Monday, because that was the part I had hoped to get to today also. The next paragraph is about that you have to hear from the Shastra that details these things, which is Srimad Bhagavatam. And then Sri Vishwanath says, and Sri Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is an explanation of the Srimad Bhagavatam in terms of these moods. So he said, Shastra also means Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So if you have to learn that book, and I'm not the first part of the book that we always cover, but the rest of the book, which is dealing with this information, it's kind of tedious to learn. So it's a lot of details because you're hearing about the inner world of the various varieties of Brijbasis. So Ganata, it is an austerity of knowledge, and if you don't want to take that austerity of knowledge, how will you be purified? Puttama bhavamagata. He says, those who have been purified by the austerity of knowledge. So you don't want to take that austerity of knowledge. How will you get that purification? We already heard this verse, yata yatatma premikyate so ma punya gata shavana bidana. To the degree you are purified by what? By the story, hearing and chanting the stories of Krishna. So there's an austerity of knowledge there. And then he makes this point, viraraga bhaya krodha, and then after giving up attachment, fear, and anger. Prabhupada, in commenting on the fear part, he says basically our experience of personalism in the material world is so, what's the word I'm looking for? Bad. I'm looking for a more eloquent word, but basically, jaded, we become cynical and all that we don't want to be persons. We don't want, and so what it translates to practically, in my observation, personally and vicariously, is that they're just also on a social level, people are afraid of embracing the responsibility of being a person. Whether it's like being a person that thinks differently from everyone in the group by speaking up, like, hey guys, I don't think that because I'll be judged. Or it's just like the fear of sticking out too much. I want to just be merge into the impersonalism of the status quo, just be like everybody else. So there's a certain weight of responsibility in being a person. So I was thinking about that. I was prompted by the social situation where people like kind of don't want to be persons. I was thinking like, well, that kind of translates into a spiritual life where we don't want the heavy responsibility of building ourselves up as individuals. Let me just merge into the societal norms, where, and it's nice. It's like super comfortable. You're not going to really step on anyone's toes. And you do feel a certain sense of belonging when you do that also. And so there's a certain impersonalism in that, where we don't want to embrace the responsibility of building ourselves up as an individual. And in one sense, the path of Raganuga Bhakti, in a very spiritual and esoteric sense, is asking us to embrace the responsibility of really being an individual, at any cost. And that requires courage, it requires fearlessness, it requires, a burden of responsibility there. So, we should embrace that. So Shastra, the relationship with Shastra is that, if you're following Vaidhi Bhakti, so Vaidhi Bhakti means what? Shastra Vidhi tells me to do this. So you're doing it, but you're not doing it so you can become a person in a very specific sense. You're doing it because that's what you're supposed to do as a bhakta. Shastra says I should do bhakti. And everyone here does bhakti, and this is my group, this is my people, so I'm also doing it. So in that sense, your relationship with Shastra is status quo, basically, in that sort of approach. And it's not a bad status quo, by the way. If you follow that, that will take you into a certain type of bhava and a certain type of prema. But the relationship of a Raganuga Bhakta is different because he's embracing a certain responsibility of being an individual, and he needs the help of Shastra to do that. And so he's also sheltered in Shastra in that way, but to build himself up, so to speak, in the process of becoming, if you will, a true person. Because if you think about it, the soul isn't, in one sense, isn't really a true person. The soul is 1/10,000th tip of the hair, basically nobody. Like we're literally so insignificant. We're not truly a person. We're an individual. So the jiva is an individual, but in a sense, he's not truly a person. And we do find personhood attractive. That's why we keep taking one body after another. But we need to learn how to become attracted to spiritual personhood. So that is there. So that's being talked about. So we have to embrace the burden of becoming a true imperishable person. And and that's really in one sense the path of Rock Mark. So the relationship with Shastra is very different. Using this after this little rant I just went on, in Vaidhi Bhakti, the relationship is one of like kind of meeting a status quo. One should do bhakti because Shastra says. The other is the burden of becoming a person, an imperishable person.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Yes. Okay. Any other comments here or questions anyone wants to make before we get off today? If not, we'll continue on Monday. I hope you find the subject matter a little bit interesting in terms of your own attraction to the real bhakti that we're supposed to be about in the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya. You're good. So it's at least meant to stir a little interest in that, so that it will change very much your relationship with bhakti the more you get into this, actually. Okay, so we'll stop here for now then. Om Tat Sat, thanks a lot. Have a great rest of your day. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur ki jai, Sri Radha Ramachandra ki jai, Go Premanandi Hari Hari Bolo.